couple more minutes before we
Yep,
begin.
let me start recording now.
Oh yeah.
How's everyone doing? Heading into this very strange Christmas. I hope those of you in Europe, appreciate my Krampus scarf because we are dealing with shadow work, and so it's important to identify
The shadow.
the shadow
Only the
knows
shadow knows.
which one should go first. How are you doing, Michael?
Can't hear you.
Oh, we're not hearing you.
Can't hear you.
Yep, we couldn't hear you there. Yeah, you're still muted. That's all right. Egbert is an incoming student.
Wonderful.
How are you doing these days?
Very well. Thank you for having me, accepting me in your circle. I've been reading this kind of stuff today.
Oh yes, systems thinking.
Systems thinking and social change is, yeah, lots of new ideas.
Cool.
Oh yeah, we're at the frothy edge.
Yep. And I have not yet watched The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, although I have it on my list, which you recommended.
Very beautiful movie.
I did watch Tenet, the new Christopher Nolan film, which is kind of interesting.
What did you think?
It seems. One critic actually had a really nice take that it feels a little like a Christopher Nolan franchise film, like he's now franchising his methods and styles, and so it's extremely competent in a lot of ways. It's very hard to follow, as everybody said, and no one quite knows. Probably if I watched it 5 more times, it would all make sense. But you know, he's a guy who works at such a crazy edge that when he's doing a giant popular work, he's still very far out. So it was an interesting film when you look at it from the integral perspective. I don't know if it's integral or not. Have you seen it yet, Mark?
Yes, I need to watch it a couple more times because his work is very, very complex. But my sense is that it is integral. Pretty much everything he makes now is integral because he's there. So, but really, this film and the last film he did, which was Dunkirk, he's really experimenting with temporal structuring in cinema.
Well, that's kind of where he started with Memento.
Right, but Memento was pluralistic. You know, he didn't really shift up into integral after Memento. His first few films were at the edge between pluralistic and integral. And then with the Batman trilogy, he was full on hardcore integral. And ever since, every film has been fairly integral, except for The Prestige was almost like he decided to do a exercise outside of the field. So it was integrative, but it was more normal than a lot of the others.
Yeah.
But one of the things about his work, which is very similar to me to Alfred Hitchcock, is that Hitchcock is great for film students because everything is up front and he's doing experiments so up front that you could see the cinematic mechanisms. And he's great to study. And Christopher Nolan, I think, is that for the integral cinema. He's like putting it out there, like, you know, like with Inception, he's literally representing the structures of consciousness in the levels of a dream and bouncing us between them, So, he's literally kind of putting it out in front. So his films are really wonderful to use as like teaching tools for integral structuring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Tenet to me doesn't entirely work. I think I can understand why a lot of people find it incomprehensible. But it is, I'm sure there is a design inside of it. If you watch it enough times, you start to realize, oh, that's what's going on.
Huh.
Yeah, well, he's doing a lot of experiments too. So one of the things about, just like with Hitchcock, I mean, some of his films are, like Vertigo is like on everyone's top 10 list of all times, but other films he's made are like, well, okay, but still, when you watch them, it's still the quality, like the power of his style is inherent in every film.
Mm-hmm.
But some are really masterpieces and some are just, experimental efforts. Like I think when Rope came out, Rope is a film he did where it's shot like a rope. So it's like it's like every shot connects to every other shot into a seamless, as if it's one shot. And it was a really beautiful experiment in cinema. Hadn't been done before the way he did it. And it got mixed reviews and it wasn't his biggest hit, but it was a big experiment that inspired other filmmakers. So it was a seed work. So with these guys like Nolan, even his so-so films are still, it's like, so he's weaving with this one, he's weaving, what I think he's doing is he's working with us to kind of bring us aware of our temporal structuring, because we're constantly having to figure out what the temporal reality is that's going on. So in a way, he's making the audience work and trying to discern temporal structures. So even though it's a standard kind of spy movie in a way, but of course with his twist, it's still working with these underlying dynamics, and especially working with the audience and exercising our perceptual field. Anyways,
So
we should
in theory,
begin.
it could be an evolutionary work just because it helps the audience to evolve in some way and become more aware of time. Although with Nolan, there's also this phrase I heard long ago, which is too clever by half. And sometimes I get that feeling with Nolan. He's excessively clever, because I thought the first part of the film, that setup, had so much potential, and then it just became this sort of very chaotic action film in which, oh, look, we're going to have things going backwards and forwards at the same time and all this stuff. And he didn't keep it clear. He didn't keep the through line clear enough to me. So it just became, I think a lot of people responded to it more like an action film rather than a deep work, even though underneath, as you say, I think there is a deep intention going on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's done that before with the Batman series in terms of, the complexity of what he's doing is under the surface of a superhero film.
Mm-hmm. Which this kind of is. Anyway, welcome.
All right, let's go.
We can move ahead. Welcome to Shadow Work in the Mediasphere, the Christmas edition. Thank you guys for coming by and joining us at Conscious Good. And let me turn this over to Mark to talk a little bit about why shadow work is so critical at this time, and why we all have shadow work to do personally and as a culture and society as well. There you go, Mark.
Okay. Well, I'm sure as most of us are aware, the last year has been pretty stressful and traumatic for a lot of us, for most of us probably. And for a lot of other people, the last 4 years have been fairly traumatic as well, with what's been going on in the United States, with the Civil War, in our consciousness, and a similar civil war happening all over the world in terms of in the consciousness field. And played out with the rise of authoritarianism and all that. So it's like we're watching all this stuff in real time unfold. And as Buckminster Fuller said, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember exactly, but basically the race to utopia and dystopia will be neck and neck until the last moment. And for me, that really describes the last 4 years as a whole. Is we have so much amazing potential at the edge, and with our technologies and all of these advances in all these different fields, and with all these potentially wondrous capacities, but that can also be used in a negative way. So there's this neck and neck race between, will we make it to our utopian future, to the other side, across the great transition, or will we regress back? And even if we regress back, that's part of the transition, understanding that. But still, it's that stress. That's kind of the foundational stress of these last 4 years. And then, of course, everything else happening in our lives, and the people who we love and know, and people being sick, or we're being sick, or just everything, and so we have a lot of individual and collective trauma to deal with. And there's a lot of wonderful people out there helping us play with that. Like Thomas Hubble and others are working with collective trauma now. The integral field, a lot of us have been working with shadow work for a while. And media is an important part of this, because a lot of our trauma comes from the media, from our receiving information, our receiving and sharing information through this sphere. Right now, we're in the media sphere, inside of another media sphere, so it's like we're in this big media sphere. And so a lot of us, especially during the pandemic, when a lot of us went online for more stuff, for more interactions, it's really now kind of like, it's representing our collective consciousness in a much more powerful way. So it's deeply interrelated, and things that we read about, or or see in videos, or whatever, news reports and our Twitter streams, whatever, they trigger us. And sometimes they trigger us, sometimes they affirm our reality, sometimes they challenge our reality, sometimes they call up and plug into our shadow material, and quite often. And our shadow, well, first I probably should say real simply, what is the shadow? So I just want to do a little perception practice here. This is what we do. We do perception practices. We don't do meditation exactly. There's a difference between a meditation practice and a perception practice. Meditation practice is basically state related. You're training yourself to achieve higher and higher states of consciousness. States are temporary, but you get tastes of higher and higher states. Perception training is about making us aware of our structure of consciousness. And our structure of consciousness, if you look at states like the waves in an ocean, but the structure is the shore. So, the structure of consciousness is like the container of the states of consciousness. And states, we can practice and get higher and higher and all that, and that's the process we call waking up. Structures do change, but that much slower, and we have to evolve through them. And often it takes shadow work to do that. So right now I want you to kind of imagine, I want you to just bring your awareness now with a perception practice. You could have your eyes open or closed. Sit in a comfortable position. The reason why you could have your eyes open or closed is because some people visualize easier with eyes open. So depending on your capacities. So just bring your awareness to your thoughts. Imagine your thoughts. Feel your thoughts as kind of like try to feel your thought field. So the information that you're hearing coming from me is coming through your ears and entering your brain, and you're processing it and you're translating it. And this is in your full awareness. So this is in your consciousness, in your thought field. Now, while this is happening, you're probably having feelings too. So expand your thought field to kind of see if you could feel your emotions and be aware of your thoughts equally in the same field. And then expand that even further to your visceral awareness, your gut, your sensory awareness, your body. So these three awarenesses are your three brains. And together, when you're consciousness of these three, that is your conscious self in that moment. See if you could feel it as a space inside your being. Now feel this is like it's an ocean. And now see if you could sense that where your thoughts, feelings, and visceral awareness is existing, beneath it, under the surface of it, under the surface of your ocean of consciousness, is your unconscious, under the surface. And this goes far down, deep. And the farther down it goes, the harder it is to bring it up into the conscious field. And in those depths is our shadow material. And just bring your awareness and see if you could just open up and see if you could sense anything in your life that comes to mind that you were feeling something inside that you projected onto somebody else. It could be you were in a fearful situation and you projected on someone else to blame them for it. Simple things or more complex things. That's one dimension of the shadow material that's underneath the surface. Because when we do that, we haven't fully owned it. And so it remains, its energy continues to work inside of us, under the surface. Now, see if you reflect on any thought patterns, or we call tapes inside of you, like from your parents, phrases or patterns that you've taken on from family, from culture, and you've taken on yourself, and you play them inside your head back and forth in certain situations. That's another dimension of the shadow. And that, again, as long as it's unconscious, its energy is powerful, and it's moving inside of you in unknown ways. Now I want you to then also bring your awareness to any memories you have, or any awarenesses you have of an experience in your life where you felt something towards somebody, but you didn't express it. So there was something you wanted to express that you held back. And that's the third dimension of the shadow. So these are three different dimensions of the shadow that we put under the surface of our consciousness. And imagine these as the tides under the surface of your consciousness. The tides have profound impact on everything. The entire ocean is affected by it. The entire oceanic environment, the climate, everything is all affected by the tides. They're unseen. They move under the surface. That is the shadow. And we have that individually and collectively. And we can use media to help us access them. So when you're ready, just return here if your eyes are closed, or let's go on. And just wanted to just do a real quick exploration on this, and then we'll open it up. We can use media in two ways here, which is individual works, and use them as mirrors for our own process. We could consciously do that with any film in a way. We look for the shadow material that's being worked through in the film. And one of the things, I don't know if everyone has read my article I posted on the integral holiday movies. But so one of the interesting things I found was that the Hallmark genre is particularly great to work on shadow work. Now, this is really interesting. Intuitively, I thought for a while that, films like Apocalypse Now that go deep into the shadow itself are good for shadow work, and they're good for shadow work. But one of the things is, if you do, I don't know if everyone's familiar with the Tonglen practice from Buddhism. And it's a way of working with the individual and collective shadow. It's one of the things we teach in the course coming up, is how to use that practice with the Mediasphere. And one of the essential things is that you ground it in love and peace. Before you enter a shadow work, you get into a safe field. And you bring that safe field throughout the entire practice. So you're breathing in the shadow, but you're breathing out light and love and this healing energy in equal measure. And this particular type of feel-good movie is very helpful for dealing with shadow work because it does that. It gives you a story that you know is going to have a happy ending. You know people are going to heal the shadow, their shadow work. So it's safe. And throughout it, it's woven fairly equally when they're really the right on stuff. So this though is rooted in the work of Frank Capra. That's where the genre actually comes from, especially It's a Wonderful Life is the model where when Capra made It's a Wonderful Life, this was after World War II, after he was in charge of the US documentary division for the army. And he was one of the first to enter the concentration camps. And up to that moment, Frank Capra was the king of comedy. And his comedies always had great challenges as well. But after he saw that horror, It's a Wonderful Life is what came out of it. And it's this beautiful mix of going deep into a challenge and have this lightness of being. He wove it so beautifully that, it takes you through, it takes you in and through. It does this kind of Tonglen process. So so we have to feel kind of safe when we're doing the shadow work. So that's kind of one of the great things about these, and especially around the Christmas time. Now, as far as the Mediasphere, when we look out at it and see what's going on, if we're aware of how it affects us, what's being triggered, something's upsetting us, something's stressing us, that's kind of the shadow work process you can do right there. Bam. All right, what's happening? And then you do the individual work that's being triggered by the Mediasphere. So you're using the Mediasphere as kind of like your mirror of your own stuff, because what triggers you, what stresses you, what angers you, so it's like when you're aware of that, you make it a practice. You could also do one of the things I highly recommend in these times, especially if you're on Twitter, a great practice to do is to create a separate account and follow as many different ideological streams as you can. Both the traditional and so it's like, actually I was thinking of posting some of these so you can get the idea, but it's like, from Fox News to MSNBC here in the States, I don't know if they're worldwide or whatever, but also Breitbart here in the state, the more extreme ones. You want to get the full spectrum, and you want to also include some of the integral and meta modern thinkers. And so you want to get ideological span, and then you want to get perceptual span. So you want to get the perceptual span. What I'm talking about is you want to get integral thinkers, you want to get the pluralistic, you want to get the mythic. So you want to kind of See if you could capture that. And it's a great meditation process or a perceptual field process that as things unfold, you watch that stream and you'll see how the different reality bubbles are responding. And that creates an objective field where you can almost sense the collective shadow. You could see it's like, so you could see, often what you really learn right away is that it's once again, it's the 10 people watching an accident. There's 10 different accidents. So you see all these multiple perspectives around every event. But this is a beautiful transformative process, just like the Sufi story of the elephant and the blind man. Has everybody heard that? I'm assuming that. So, well, real quick, 3 blind men head into a forest, come to a clearing. One of them reaches out, they all 3 reach out and try to sense things as they walk. And the first one hits a wall, a flat, solid space. Goes, wait, there's a wall here. The second one tries to go and feel it, but all of a sudden they're like holding this cylinder towards the ground, and they're like, no, it's a tree. Then the third one comes, and he tries to grab onto it or feel it, and he feels this undulating tube, and he goes, oh my God, it's a snake. And at that moment, and this is my spin on the story, at that moment, an old woman walks in, looks at them, and basically says, why are you guys feeling that elephant? So this is a great way for us to see the elephant. We step a little bit outside the field when we see all the different blind men trying to understand the situation. And using the Twitter field to do that is really quite powerful because of its structure, that it's this real-time stream that keeps going, and and basically it's a great tool for that. So those are different ways we can play with it and use it. Of course, in the main course, we'll be unpacking this even further. So now I want to open it up to musings, questions.
I just want to mention also that we have been joined by Trina Wyatt, who's the founder of Conscious Good. Welcome, Trina. I don't know if she's...
Hi, sorry, it's a noisy house here, and I just wanted to pop in and say hi, and I've missed you guys.
We missed you too, Trina.
It's so good to see your faces. I promised my son I was going to take him out for a hike, so that's why I'm in my hiking gear, but sending you all lots of love.
Thank you.
Okay, continue. I love hearing you, Mark Allen.
Thank you, Trina.
Thanks. So I was going to add also, there's another holiday film if you want to see one that's a little bit more out of the mainstream. There's one called Collateral Beauty. That was a film with Will Smith that was widely hated. It came out a few years ago about an advertising executive who is grieving the loss of a child, and so his other colleagues in the advertising company decide to try to help him out. And it's a very sort of strange film, but if you see it through this lens, this evolutionary lens of an act of media shamanism to help deal with the trauma, it becomes far more clear what it's doing. And I think it's actually not a bad film.
That's a good point too. There's another thing I wanted to talk about here real quick. Why media is a mirror for us. Edgar Morin really kind of unpacked this. And basically the idea here is that since moving image media, especially, mimics how we imagine, how we dream. It's a literal, our brains actually interpret it as such. Our brains process it the same way they process a dream or something we imagine. And when we're watching it, there's what he calls a doubling effect. So that our consciousness and the consciousness of the media are doubling. So it's like, this is a dream, but it becomes a dream inside me, connecting with my dream, with everything else inside me. So I'm projecting and identifying in this loop, this doubling loop. And it's actually why using media to assist in healing is actually quite powerful, because it induces this doubling effect. And the brain accepts it much easier than if we're just reading something or we're just, listening to something. But when it's multi-sensorial, which replicates how we imagine and how we dream, then it's instantly processed as an experience. And the more immersive it is, both technologically and psychologically, the more that penetrates us.
And doing this work is very good for your health, because Edgar Morin, I just discovered, is still alive. He's 99 years old.
All right, Edgar.
And a legendary figure, apparently, in the French-speaking world, not as well known in the US, I guess.
Yeah, but he is kind of a French Ken Wilber. I mean, in terms of the volumes he's written. I mean, he's written like, I guess 40, 50 books, and different fields, sociology. And he's written 2 books on the cinema, which I think are foundational. Is there anybody? Any thoughts? Oh, yes, Michael. We can't hear you. Can't hear you, brother.
You can post in the chat if you want. So part of our issue with the media shamanism too is this point Mark has made previously, that you have to heal yourself before you can heal others. So part of the task of the media shaman is to not only use media to heal ourselves, but then to in turn try to figure out how to do that to help others. And so you think of yourself as a healer, and media is just your tool. Just like shamans of old had magic mushrooms and drums and rituals. Now we have technology, but it doesn't make us any less of a shaman to use modern technology, because the shaman uses whatever the most cutting edge technology is to help awaken others.
Yeah.
I have a question, Mark Allen. You mentioned that the Hallmark films are particularly suited for shadow work, also in the Christmas period. Could you elaborate on that and tell us what is so particular about those films? I didn't know any of the films in the list.
Okay. The Hallmark genre, what they've done is...
We should mention that Hallmark is a greeting card company in America, so they're very well known in the US for that. Yeah. And they now make these films that are not taken seriously as art, but Mark is saying they actually have a lot of power and value.
But they're very popular, at least here in the States. And Netflix is copying the formula. Lifetime TV is copying the formula. So they're taking the Hallmark formula. The Hallmark formula is basically this. It's life has challenges. We have obstacles inside of ourselves and around us. And that's what life is. That's, that's how we grow. But life is also blessed and magical. And all of this is part of the journey. So that's a foundation. And then the foundation also is that in their reality, they're usually, most of their films do not bring in political ideology. There's no culture war per se, but there is this interesting integration of polarizations. So, for example, often you will get the experience of our heroine. Now, usually, which is interesting, usually the stars of Hallmark films are the women, which is this is one of the things I think the critics don't even recognize as what this means. It's like both, I mean, this whole genre is women oriented in terms of the hero, the heroine is usually a woman. So, and the key is that rural society represents family and community and tradition and grounding. The city represents that place we go to seek our dreams and learn big lessons. But we only fulfill our dreams when we end up trying and struggling to fulfill the dream, but then returning home and finding our true dreaming with the help of family, friends, and community. And so then we discover what we really want. So one of the underlying things is that the heroine is usually someone who has taken on a cultural construct about success. And they're striving for that. Even if what they're doing is something they love, they often get caught in that, that rational field of success, the corporate success and all that stuff, the bottom line. So, but then it's never like, they're never against any particular type of job or wealth or anything like that. It's all about the inner dynamics of, are you doing what you really, really, truly, in your true self want to be doing? And what's stopping you internally? That is the foundation of the genre. So you see, that foundation is the shadow work. It's basically saying the obstacles are internal and you have to face them. And often what's happening externally is happening to help you face the internal. And yeah, they're sappy, they're not masterpieces. They often have holes in the narrative or whatever, but this underlying pattern, and some of them, they go deep into this, into the struggle, into the sadness of loss, of trauma and all that. But they always pull you out of that into sweetness. So it's like, so for example, when I watched recently, it was a process where the mother was dying and the daughter was trying to save the farm. And, there was a lot of layers going on, but at the end, the experience, they didn't show the mother dying, but they just went up to that moment and just that, so you could feel it like, all right, this is it. And they brought you to the dying moment. But then they cut a little later to the daughters who's found the love of her life because of the process of helping her mother die. Together at the end, they hold each other. So you get this, you feel that? It's like there is this transfer of love and beingness, so that you went through the trauma, but there's love. There's still love. There's still, so that is how the genre works. It's just, and so it's a really beautiful, fascinating thing. And it's, but again, it's not masterpieces or great art or whatever like that. But it's the reason why I believe it's so popular is it's because it integrates the polarities that we're struggling in. We get to see a world in which all the political ideologies and the mythic and rational and pluralistic live in harmony and actually support each other.
I have a question. This is such a beautiful conversation. I mean, not conversation, just talk of yours about the Hallmark movies. And I remember reading a woman who, I think she's a cartoon artist, talking about how the heroine's journey versus the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. And that she was wishing that there could be a new heroine's journey because of the difference between the two, that the woman usually is dealing with something where their journey is to end up right where they were in a different way versus bringing change to the whole outer world in the way that a hero can do. And I thought that was really interesting. Is it really that gender specific? Has it been like that in films, or have there been films that are about a woman character that are more of the hero's journey?
There's been, you're dealing with the dance between agency and communion, mm-hmm. the masculine and the feminine. And the goal of the hero's journey, the masculine journey, is agency, or the process is agency. So the hero's journey is about agency, finding the grail. There's an object, there's a goal, there's a target, there's a direction, there's an action. And communion, the heroine's journey, is about communion, because that's the feminine. And communion is, the goal is relationships. The goal is heart opening. The goal is, an internal, is either a individual or a collective internal thing. So it's an awakening of your own self. It's an awakening of how you are in relationships, mm-hmm. how you are in the world. It's a connecting of relational fields. So that's kind of the foundation between those journeys. So the heroine's journey, the goal is communion. The goal and process. So it's a communion process. Now, there are filmmakers experimenting with an integration of those, and most integral filmmakers integrate the two. So you'll get this combination of agency and communion. One filmmaker that has been spearheading this is Ava DuVernay. the African-American woman filmmaker who's really exploring this beautifully. And let's see, well, in pretty much all of her films, she is constantly shifting between moments of agency and moments of communion. Often she will have us in an agency moment and then shift it into a communion field, put it on hold kind of, and then the agency is redirected because of the communion. So she's really experimenting with this beautifully.
You may have heard us talk about this with Wrinkle in Time, which is a Hollywood film, which is sort of an action-oriented film. There's a task, which is to find her father, but there's also a lot of moments of communion throughout that between the women as they do this. So it's an unusual action film, you know, and a children's film, so it's an entrainment for children as well.
Now, it's a really tricky thing. I mean, her film was brilliant, but it failed at the end because she didn't get the balance right between agency and communion. There was at the climax, she shifted into communion too soon. But again, just like Christopher Nolan, she's a brilliant cutting edge filmmaker exploring the further reaches. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but the effort is important. Looks like we got 8 minutes left on our clock. So anybody else?
Well, I'm curious, or anybody else, sorry, I should.
Well, no, you too. No, you know, you could go.
Anybody else? Okay. I'm just finishing up reading a book that I hadn't thought about it, but it reminds me very much of this conversation about American history by Jill Lepore, a Harvard historian. And she talks about the development of the printing press and, you know, how people's voices started to get this amplification in culture. And then she's starting into Alfred Hitchcock. You know, it goes all the way from, and so I mean, so how does, it's clear that film is super, super potent. And I'm curious to know what would be the medicine for what's going on now. What would be that individual and collective shadow work that we can do through film, through filmmaking?
My first answer would be foundationally, polarization. Because we're polarized inside and out. Yeah. So individual and collective polarization. The Tonglen practice is wonderful for this, where you just take polarization and, for, you know, like see it in another and try to take in their suffering from that.
Breathe in,
and then breathe out the light and love healing, and then do that, and then spread it out further and further into the polarization field, and then bring it back into yourself and try to release your polarization. Now, when I say release, the Tonglen practice is great for pulling it up and releasing it, but you still have to do the shadow work on your own shadow. So once you do this Tonglen practice and you open up that field, then you want to do, in integral theory, we talk about the 3-2-1 shadow work process. Mm-hmm. Well, I add a fourth thing to that, which we'll cover in the course. It's too short now, but basically the practice is, once you've done the Tonglen and you've worked on, let's say, polarization, helping to heal that in another and spread out until you get the entire sentient beingness. You want to go that far. And then when you open in yourself, after that, you want to take that self field that you've opened. And first you want to look at it in the third person. Look at it as an object, like look at what's the experience, what's the story, just kind of look at it as an object in your awareness. Observe it, like a scientist would, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And then you shift into a second person field with it in relationship to it. So imagine you're sitting at a table and, as Ram Dass said, have tea with it. Talk to it, ask it what's the lesson it has for you? What is it trying to say to you? Listen to it, And then the first person is you want to try to get inside of it. Put yourself in its beingness. Go really deep into it and try to imagine what it feels like to be in that, like to be in the heart of that. And what it's, what it is, what it feels like, experience it viscerally. Now, this is the three brains too. So you're using your thought brain for the third person, using your heart brain for the relational, then you're using your gut brain for the first person. You're anchoring it in that visceral. What does it feel like? Like how it's, And then I add the fourth phase, which is now you want to hold these three and try to feel it in an evolutionary framework. That you are in this moment, and this moment is a flowing now. And this is all part of the flow of your life, and seeing how this trauma, this energy has been, how it has affected your life,
yeah,
and brought you to this moment, and how others around you have had similar patterns, and expanded all the way out to everybody. And so then you're bringing it home, to this. So then you're trying to hold these three dimensions in this evolutionary stream and just be with it and breathe with it.
thank you.
So one other issue that we have talked about, I think we talked about it in the Media Shaman Toolkit, which is available on Conscious Good, is this idea that our technologies now are actually weaponizing division. So a lot of people spend a lot of their time in that gut space of like, the hell with these people, the heck with Democrats, Republicans, Trumpians, Biden people. But then you go out in the world, and well, now, unfortunately, we can't go out in the world as much, so that's another problem with the pandemic. But normally you go out and you interact with people from all these different dimensions, and you have a perfectly fine time with them. But then you go back into this world of this internalized world of hatred and anger and division. And a lot of people are spending a lot of time in those spaces.
But here's the gift of that.
They've been weaponized
The
against
gift of
us.
that is that's the shadow. We've created a technology where people feel free to express what they don't express anywhere else, or they go wild, or that, so it's like, so it's the media sphere is a great place to find the collective shadow because of that. You could post anonymously, or you can, you could say things and don't have the so it's really part of the evolutionary shift we're going through. This is all perfect as it is. It's all contributing to, it's all the grist for the mill of our enlightenment, as Ramdas would say, or it's all the sand inside the oyster shell, right? That's making the pearl.
I just listened to a talk this morning by Zen Roshi, and he was talking about that resistance in the mind to, feeling the polarity. That's pride. I thought that was an interesting way of referencing that, like that instinct. It's like a self-referencing resistance.
Yeah, well, actually, to try to transcend polarity taps into our essential illusion of separateness. And that scares the out of us. We desire union, but we're terrified of it because it probably means that we're no longer going to be a separate individual self some way. So our ego knows it's means it's it's in trouble. It's so yeah. So the resistance to this is probably the greatest, in my opinion. This transition we're going through is perhaps the greatest humanity has ever faced, because part of it is we have to transcend our polarization field, internally and externally, which is
Your task.
Humanity has never had to face that at this kind of scale.
And polarization is still built into our systems, because all of our systems
okay.
are rational systems, which have countries and nation states and all these different structures that have polarization in them. We have to transcend the nation state polarity and become global. So we're all one entity, and then we kind of feel that interconnectedness.
In perception wise, it's like the mythic structure freaks out when you talk like that, because they imagine a mythic collective rule.
Yeah.
Where this is more, you could still have countries and cities and all that, but it's just the center of our circle of care and concern is humanity, is the planet. It's not about the externals, it's our perceptual field, our circle of care and concern is that wide. But then again, and then the structures will evolve to fit that once we do that. But as we talked about, and then we'll wrap up real quick. The foundation of why we're doing all this work is that the great transition we're in, one of the foundations of it is that it's being part of it is there's an unprecedented gap between the cutting edge of our technologies and the minimum edge of our structures of consciousness and power. So we have in some cases, a 4-stage gap between the structure of consciousness it takes to operate a technology and the structure of consciousness where we're actually at. And every problem we have is because of that gap. And our only way to heal the gap in time is with media. Because that's the only way we could affect consciousness at scale. Now, that's the only way, how can I say this? It's the second to only way. The other way is a lot harder, which is that enough of us make the shift so that the collective self field itself shifts. But these are two connected, because media is our vehicle for sharing that awakening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So they're intertwined. So what's going on is we need to awaken as many individual cells in our collective being that it takes to make the tipping point.
Alrighty, well, thank you everyone for coming by once again for the Media Shaman Studio. Hopefully you've learned something about shadow work in the media sphere. You can always go to mediashaman.org, which is our site where we have our class that we have coming up in January for those who are interested. And also the Media Shaman Toolkit is up on Conscious Good Creators Network. And hopefully you all have a peaceful, healthy, and happy holiday season.
Stay safe, stay well, stay awake.
Thank you.
Thank you to our new friend Ipo from Romania.
Thank you. Great to hear you, and great to